Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About Live Shopping, a series dedicated to unraveling the intricacies of video commerce in all its various formats. I'm Cynthia Nelson, your host, three-time entrepreneur, Forbes contributor, investor, and advisor. Today, we're talking to Sophie Freres. Good afternoon, Sophie, and thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi. First up, I want to hear your story. What actually inspired LiSa? How did this all come about? It's always a great founder story. There's always some unique twist and turn to how you got here. So let my listeners know.
Yes, and only if only it were always a straight path, right?
Yeah, it never is. No, I don't think it ever is, right?
It's scary if it is. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way, because
Yeah.
then something bumpy is going to happen soon. But no, it's been a long and winding road, in the best possible way though. So I very originally my career used to work in finance when I was in my early 20s, and quickly decided that's not for me, and then tried to figure out what was for me. And all I knew is it was something more customer facing, experience related. I just enjoyed the sort of psychology behind how we discover things, explore things, and what that sort of does to us. And ended up in retail as a trainee in procurement. So very classic, I went through a really classic sort of retail career, if that's what you want to call it, at a big box corporate, retail group, which was, I loved it, every part of it. And then I sort of started evolving into more and more sort of customer experience related jobs. So I went over consulting to, brand management, running one of the largest own brands of the company, and then eventually moved into in the innovation department and helped build that up under the sort of group CEO. And that's where I really discovered my passion for the intersection between, let's say, technology and creating great customer experiences based on that technology.
Mhm.
But found that, I don't know how it is in other sectors, but I found that in retail, the sort of translation between tech and customer was almost impossible, because these two groups of people spoke two entirely different languages. And
Yeah.
it's a unique skill set if you can kind of get both of them. Not to say I'm, the tech expert in that sense, but I get it well enough,
Mhm.
hopefully, to design something great based on it. And yeah, so after 10 years in a corporate career, and after having sort of tried to look into the future quite a bit, also through that innovation department, my partner and I actually had all these ideas about how the future of digital experiences would look like, and we felt like video would have a huge role to play in that, but generally communities and the way people want to discover things would have a big role to play in that. And our first venture was actually an online shop for kids fashion, which was centered around his original family business, where we experimented with a whole bunch of stuff. So this is like 7 years ago, and we were not successful launching a D2C business. That was, and I have so much respect for anybody that manages to pull that off, because that is
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
That being said, we had experiences like shoppable catalogs. 7 years ago, I was doing live shopping through, FaceTime, Skype, etc., with my, kids fashion clients all over the world.
Mhm.
And there was something to these formats that worked, right? So live shopping, we saw almost zero return rates. We saw incredibly high average order values. We saw very high customer satisfaction. There's something about being live which instills trust instantly. So there was just something to that, that really sort of stuck and worked. That being said, sourcing software solutions to bring these kind of experiences to our website was almost impossible
Yeah.
at a certain price point, right? We would have needed back then, something like us today. And so
Yep.
that's what informed the business. That's what inspired LiSa. LiSa originally was a project working title,
Mhm.
and it's short for live shopping assistant.
Oh,
And
so I was
yeah,
wondering if it was like, like Steve Jobs, Lisa was his child.
yeah,
I was like wondering if this was like a same. Okay.
no, and if so, then it was a failed project. So I'm not sure that would have been my reference. To be fair, I do get asked that a lot. And I'm like, I think probably I would have picked a better reference had it been more intentional. But no,
Yeah.
it was a project title. And then we spun out, the business, and
Right.
joined, honestly, a startup competition, I think 5 years ago, more or less based on an MVP of this, and won. And then it was like, what's the company name? And you're like, okay, LiSa.
We'll just use Lisa. It's here.
Exactly. And then that's it. And then that was became the name of the business. And then we couldn't really go back after that. or at least it didn't make much sense. So
Yeah.
that's
Once
how
you get,
LiSa was originally created. Yeah.
that's really super interesting. It's out of a real need, understanding that I think that whole technology, retail media, consumer, there is a super big mashup that's happening right now between all kind of those three sectors. You're seeing it across, music as well, music, technology, brands, influencers, like all of this is seemingly kind of coming together, and live does something, live does something that, you just really can't get when done well, you can't get anywhere else. What's the difference kind of between what you're doing and the other shoppable or, live platforms that are out there?
So we originated from live, but in the meantime, we've become a 360-degree social commerce platform. So what do we mean by that? Having looked very closely at this sort of space and what will really be required for it to really scale in the West, let's say, as it
Yep.
has in China, is exactly what you're touching on, the seamlessness between all the different moving parts of it. So that sounds quite abstract. What do I mean by that? So very specifically, if I'm a brand manager and I want to run social commerce for my brand, I have to look at different social platforms, which
Right.
I have to list on individually because most of them insist on the checkout happening on that platform, which means I have to relist my products, basically rebuild a mini version of my e-commerce onto their sort of platform
Yeah.
to reach the audience on that platform. Then, I have providers like LiSa. We do this piece as well, and we do this piece particularly holistically. So we are a platform that provides social shopping software as a service solutions,
Hmm.
actually all on one platform. So you can get all the formats off of us, but that's only one part of what we do. But then, yeah, as a brand manager, I want to run, social commerce on my website across all these social platforms. I want to repurpose content across all of these channels. Ideally, I want to be able to make them shoppable across all of these channels. So
Hmm.
suddenly you have like a tech infrastructure to consider, a CMS, a
Hmm.
CRM, your e-com system. And that, I think at that point, you as a brand manager, you're like, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Because this will also require all my departments to work together,
Yeah.
some form of integration or another. And then it's like, you're really just to run an experiment to figure out whether this is even for my brand. I don't know, right? That just seems a bit crazy. And I think that's what's really been holding back also the evolution and the growth, of all of this in the West. That being said, we have brands which we work with like Marks and Spencer,
Hmm.
uh, that are absolutely crushing it. And why? Because from the get-go, they looked at this, yes, as an experiment, but one they were really willing to not invest necessarily money in. Also a fallacy. Many think that this requires new skills and resources. That's not necessarily true,
Hmm.
but thought into it. And from the get-go, they considered how did this fit into our overall, customer experience strategy. And yeah, they're doing an incredible job. They go live almost every day. They then go on to repurpose that as, shoppable videos also through the LiSa platform on their website. They then consciously create campaigns to drive awareness to those videos. So that content keeps doing stuff for them. And
Right.
then most recently we've released, shoppable stories and like auto snippets on PDP, which means that your live shows get automatically sliced into little snips or clips, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
and placed onto the corresponding product page. And then you have another extra sort of, ROI that you're driving off the content. Now we're also plugging into social platforms, which means you can do two things. You can pull in your content from socials to feed it into your on-site social shopping, and you can push it back out again, right? Your lives, your videos. So all of that to say, we're really a 360-degree social commerce platform. We're also beginning to plug into CRMs, et cetera, et cetera. So really what, in a couple of months' time, we are going to be is the one tool a brand needs to run any social commerce, no matter where they want to do it. And that's the approach that we're taking because we think that's the only way this is really going to scale, also plugging in the creators and so on in the West.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on some things that I think have been the downfall of a lot of brands and companies that have tried doing it. One is, I feel like when you mention Marks and Spencer, they actually thought about it as a holistic strategy. from the beginning. It wasn't, kind of like this one-off of what we're going to do over here, video commerce. It was, how does this video commerce technology and tool and customer experience fit into our overarching ecosystem? That's strategic planning, which I think has been missing in a lot of brands where they just kind of do a one-off and then they
Mhm.
spend all this money and time and they're like, it didn't really work. It's like, well, you never really planned out the content to go and travel to not only your owned and earned media channels, but also paid, or are there partnerships or at other places beyond that that you should actually be extending that content to? So we have actually talked to a lot of brands who have said, "Oh, we did it once, it didn't work." It's like, okay, it's like saying, "Oh, my computer doesn't work. What's working? It's not working. What is it?" It's like they're not
Or my
strategy,
absolutely.
right?
Or my favorite example, it's like opening an Instagram account, doing two posts and being
It's
surprised,
yeah.
it doesn't work.
Exactly. It's exactly what I say. It always is. Well, you didn't, start Facebook 10 years ago and expect the post to all of a sudden start driving likes and shares. It's taken 10 years and this is an evolution. And if you're going to be on it, you need to get on it now and do kind of the proof of concepts and really spend the time and energy. We saw Walmart doing it early stage in
Mhm.
the US. And, the first lives that they were doing, like no one was showing up, right? The audience wasn't trained, even if they had a big celebrity on there with their products that everybody knew from TV. It just, the audience wasn't trained yet to go to those things. And now, they're cranking out amazing shows and they're doing really well. They have their own Walmart.com live area where they have everything. So it's again the consumer interaction too, of getting consumers to understand what this is. And it's not the old home shopping network 24 hours a day, an hour-long show. It can be 15 minutes of a great product drop that's really exciting, that drives, amazing interaction with consumers and revenue. And you're gathering
Absolutely.
data, real-time chatting and real-time data and real-time information. I think that's also a great use of these
I
tools.
think, seeing the sorry, there was a tiny bit of a lag. I apologize if I
Okay.
interrupted. No, you're absolutely right. And another thing Marks and Spencer did really well early on is discover that what do their customers really want to see? And they realized really early on they don't need to invest 5 or 10K into to produce any of this. They designed really cute little flexible studio spaces,
Yeah.
really tiny on a really tiny budget. They actually also what they did really well is from the get-go, as to your point about it being holistic, they defined OKRs for their teams around how much is it allowed to cost. Like they just made it, an intrinsic part of their daily operations really fast. And so they were very mindful of how much money is getting spent on creating this content on the one hand. So that's been really, really helpful, obviously,
Yeah.
rather because I know so many cases where all of this after two shows they said it doesn't work. Why? Because they're dropping 10K per
Yeah,
show in terms of
exactly.
production costs. Well, how are you ever going to recover that in, within a time frame of two shows? So
Yeah.
that and another thing, and I think this is really what stands out the most for me, is they very quickly realized people come to Marks and Spencer live shows to see Marks and Spencer. They don't come to see celebrity XYZ there. I mean, that fair enough can be definitely occasionally a sensible and fun thing to do for special events, etc.
Right.
They really come to see Marks and Spencer. What does that mean? They want to see Marks and Spencer faces, people that
Yeah.
actually also interact with customers
Yep.
on a regular basis, or people that, design products for them.
Hmm.
And, you know, 90% I think of their shows are run by their in-house staff.
Yeah.
And that's what's made this really scalable. There were the first three people that did it, then the next three, and I'm not 100% sure, but I feel something like between 30 to 40, hosts which regularly do live shopping almost on a daily basis, which are their own staff and
Their
people.
own staff. And who knows the product better than their own staff? Their own buyers, sales associates who are working, with those product manufacturers all the time, right? They actually have an education on what the product is and they can describe it in the best way too. And I think that's the whole thing with hosts as well, that we've talked about before on the show, which is everybody just thinks a celebrity is going to be really great. I'm like, just because they're a celebrity does not mean they actually know how to
Mm.
sell. And
Oh
it,
yeah, it's
they
very
have a
different.
million followers, it doesn't mean, that they're going to be able to sell, nor are they really trained at being
Mhm.
a seller. right? So actually investing in hosts and or training your own staff
Mhm.
makes a ton of difference. And I think it feels probably way more authentic to the audience as well.
No,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
had a
Sorry.
question. So no, go ahead. No, I had a question on everybody's been talking about AI. I mean, we live with AI every day, but what do you think generative AI is it going to have an impact on content creation inside of the live shopping VOD ecosystem? What are your thoughts?
Well, live shopping's one piece of that puzzle. I mean, like I said, as our platform kind of covers all content formats now,
Right.
making it shoppable and interactive. So basically, we turn any, piece of content, whether it's still a short clip, a long video, or a live stream, and make it interactive and shoppable, and then you can put that on any channel, right? Um, so obviously, especially, the still sort of visual content, etc., a lot of that is going to be supported by AI in terms of generation. And of course, the video content itself to a certain degree might be generated by AI. But, and I think that's where the differentiation with the live also comes in. Yes,
Hmm.
there might be, AI-based virtual live shopping hosts. And I know we're seeing that in China and all of those
Yep.
things. But I think, the whole mission of our business really is to bring human interaction back into a digital environment, real human interaction.
Mhm.
So while the AI will be doing all the increasing of the ROI, let's say, and enablement of all of that, I mean, there's a lot of AI in our platform as well to do all of those things better and to get
Right.
more ROI off of all of that. When it comes to the actual live moment, the actual live experience, personally, I think the whole point is that you're trying to give your, customers access or your community access to you as a brand. So I'm not sure that I believe in AI salespeople for just that front facing, that one piece. For
Yeah.
everything else, we're building it into anything and everywhere we can, just
Yeah.
because it makes, brings so much more efficiency into everything, of course.
Yeah. If you had a crystal ball, what do you see kind of predicting the future in 2024, 2025 of the platform, social commerce, VOD selling? Like, where do you think it's going?
Mhm. So I think actually I was last week, I was at World Retail Congress.
Hmm.
And that's always I really enjoy going there because it gives me an opportunity just to sort of lean back and listen to
Hmm.
what, the biggest retailers, C-levels are thinking about. What are their current challenges? How do they see the future? Just to have in mind, what do I need to design my business and product towards in the next 2, 3, 5, whatever years. And what made me very happy is that on almost all panels, the word community or social was mentioned. So we really believe that the future of all of this is community. That's what, that's what's driving this. And
Hmm.
if as a brand you want to be meaningful, and essentially survive, in my opinion, in the next sort of 2 to 5 years, you have to build a community. And you have to build that community not only on social media platforms. So I think social media has a massive role to play in this, which we also really suggest our brands to lean into. It's also a fallacy to think that it's an either or discussion with social
Right.
commerce. No, it's a
Right.
leverage it all discussion. But the question is, how do you make that community yours as a
Right.
brand?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of brands are only just realizing how dependent to a certain degree they've become on social platforms, that if they
Yep.
change the algorithm, you're suddenly
Yep.
not in touch with your community anymore.
Yep.
Is it then
Yep.
really your community, by the way? It's also a
Yep.
worthwhile discussion. So how do you create community on the one hand, and how do you manage and scale community on the other? And I was very positively impressed that that was really something that was top of mind, and also sort of human-centered business design as technology sort of becomes an enabler.
Hmm.
How do you refocus your business to become human-centric also is a really interesting discussion point. And I think this community commerce aspect sort of sits at the middle of that. So all of that to say, I think in the future there's going to be a lot more consolidation and weeding out, let's say, among brands and retailers and formats that win. I
Hmm.
think what we're seeing happening online is a pretty much a reflection of what we saw happening offline on the high street or main street, let's say, 10, 15 years ago,
Mhm,
where suddenly if you didn't have a great experience, that was it. And
mhm,
now, online is becoming so crowded. It's the same story, just with different technologies behind it and on a different channel.
mhm.
And I think community is the answer to it. And I think if as a brand you don't invest into building and owning your community, it's going to be very tough in the next years to come to survive.
And we all used to own them, by the way. Before social media was there, we had chat rooms and CR databases full of consumers that we talked to all the time and got information from all the time before there was ever a D2C. It was we were providing content to them. I mean, from my company perspective back in the day. And, the reliance on social is really scary. It's very expensive. And with specifically now, with cookies going away, they are going away. First party data is really top priority for every single brand that's out there. And there's some of them are starting kind of almost from scratch because they don't, if they're selling their product in retail, they don't get any data back on the consumer that's being sold to. Zero. If they're managing their consumers on Facebook, Instagram, that whatever it happens to be, they're not getting any data back on them other than what's in that. And they don't really own, again, who owns them really? The platform own them? Do the brand really own them? And the ROAS going down, they're spending more to get less.
Yeah.
Bringing it, excuse me, in-house and really owning that customer experience end to end is, I think, if they don't do it, like you're saying, it's game over.
Oh, absolutely. But I think still that social media has a very critical role to play in that.
Yeah,
I mean, right now, as you say, there's a bit of a, let's call it what it is to a certain degree. There's a power struggle over the
yep,
data. I think, people have noticed now more what's sort of really happening, kind of
yeah,
happened kind of violently. And then they
yep.
started selling data back to retailers. They're like, wait a minute, why am I suddenly buying my customer data back from, I used to own this, as to your point. Um, but honestly, what I really believe, and also, for our business, this is we're really trying to push as hard as we can and to trailblaze, in that regard, is everybody can win. And if everybody, and I know there's a lot of things and reasons why the Chinese model is the way it is, a lot of
Yeah,
reasons, I'm
yeah,
not saying we need to emulate those, but the fact of the matter is that all the platforms talk to each other. Why? Because they're all run and operated by two big players. But
yep,
socials talk to the e-commerce, talk to the marketing and retail media platforms, the creator platforms. It's all one big ecosystem. So at LiSa, that's what we're building in the background, right? So we're approaching social media platforms, we're creator platforms, all of that, and we're connecting all the dots to facilitate that exact exchange, right? And on a sort of higher level, what I really hope what happens is that, social media, retail sort of sit down together and say, because there is a win-win in all of this. There's a very easy way if everybody agrees to do things seamlessly, let's say cross-platform, just to
yep,
enable data sharing to a certain degree, which consumers are happy to do. If it
yep,
means it's convenient and seamless for them and an awesome
yeah,
experience,
yeah.
they'll share their data with TikTok and Walmart and Marks and Spencer and Avon,
About
whatever.
it's about that it's about that trust, right? It's about having a great brand, but having the trust with the consumer so that they will give that information up. And that's a, dedication to being customer centric, frankly.
Well, absolutely. And again, I think there is absolutely space for everyone to win in this. And I think if everybody opens up and this became a more sort of us together conversation, social commerce could easily become a third of all e-commerce the way it has in China as well. So I hope, we're trying with our connectors to recreate an ecosystem like that, and it's starting to really work. But hopefully, at a sort of meta level, these conversations also happen. That would be really helpful.
That's a great note to end our conversation on, and a positive note. I agree. Working together is definitely hashtag better together always. Thank you so much for joining us. My audience will love this conversation for sure. And how would they get a hold of you? Can you give them your email address?
Sure. It's Sophie, so it's Sophie at hello-lisa.com.
Awesome. That's Sophie at hello-lisa.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Cynthia.